The cafe was humming with its usual morning energy. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, mixing with soft chatter and the occasional clatter of cups. Patrons sat at small wooden tables, absorbed in their phones, newspapers, or quiet conversations. Among them, a young waiter moved silently, unnoticed at first. His apron was slightly creased, his white shirt crisp but simple, and his hair just messy enough to look natural. There was something about the calm in his movements, almost like he didn't belong in the hustle of the cafe, but still, no one paid much attention. Then, as if guided by some unseen impulse, he walked over to the old upright piano tucked into the corner. Its wood was polished, but worn from years of use. Keys slightly yellowed, and it seemed almost forgotten amidst the modern day. He brushed off the dust, sat down, and rested his hands gently on the keys. At first, nothing happened. People continued with their morning routines, sipping coffee and scrolling through their phones. But then, his fingers moved, just slightly at first, striking a few soft, deliberate notes. The sound was gentle, almost hesitant, yet somehow beautiful. It drifted through the room like a soft breeze, catching attention without demanding it. Conversations paused, cups were held midair, and some patrons looked up, curiosity flickering across their faces. There was an unusual calm in the music, but beneath it, a subtle tension seemed to linger. Something about the notes felt strange, not frightening, but certainly unsettling. As he continued to play, the melody grew richer. It flowed effortlessly, weaving a story of its own. The waiter's eyes were focused on the keys, but there was a distant quality to his gaze, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Patrons began leaning forward, drawn in by the music. Even the regulars, who had seen live performances countless times, couldn't look away. They whispered to each other, sharing puzzled glances. "Who is he?" Some murmured, "Where did he learn to play like that?" Then, just as the melody reached a soft, almost soothing climax, a single note rang out sharply, out of place. It cracked through the gentle atmosphere like a sudden gust of wind. The cafe fell silent. All eyes turned toward the young waiter, but he didn't seem to notice. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, and then he continued, as though nothing had happened. But the mood had shifted. Patrons felt a chill creeping up their spines, subtle but undeniable. Something was wrong, though no one could say what it was. A woman at a corner table dropped her spoon, startled by the unexpected note. A man, mid-sip of coffee, froze, his eyes wide. Even the barista behind the counter glanced nervously at the piano, unsure why he felt so uneasy. The music itself was captivating, but there was a heaviness now, like the room had become suspended between reality and something else. Each note that followed carried more than sound, it carried an unspoken tension, as if the piano itself was alive. The waiter's hands moved faster now, more confidently. His fingers glided over the keys with precision that seemed almost unnatural, producing melodies that flowed with a haunting beauty. Patrons leaned closer, mesmerized, yet the sense of unease grew stronger. Some tried to shrug it off, whispering reassurances to themselves. But deep down, everyone felt it. Something extraordinary, and possibly dangerous, was happening right in front of him. Then, without warning, the music stopped. His hands lifted, hovering in the air for a second too long. Silence filled the cafe, heavy and oppressive. Patrons blinked, suddenly aware of the sudden emptiness. A woman whispered, almost to herself, "What just happened?" Her voice trembled. The waiter didn't move, didn't speak, only stared ahead with the same distant look in his eyes. The cafe felt colder, though the sun still streamed through the windows. The calm of the morning had vanished, replaced by an uneasy anticipation. Everyone sensed it, but couldn't explain it. Something had shifted, something beyond ordinary comprehension. The piano, once an innocent piece of furniture, now seemed like a portal to a story no one was prepared to hear. Patrons exchanged nervous glances, some fidgeting with cups, others gripping their phones tightly. The young waiter remained calm, unaware of or perhaps indifferent to the ripples of unease he had caused. But the moment lingered, heavy with suspense, as if the next note, the next action, could change everything. The room remained silent for a moment longer, everyone too captivated or too afraid to break it. Then, slowly, whispers began. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her friend. "Did you hear that? That note. It didn't sound right." Her voice carried both fascination and fear. A man pulled out his phone, ready to record, though even he felt hesitant. Something about the melody had altered the energy of the room. The waiter continued to play, his hands moving with growing intensity. Each note seemed to echo in the air, lingering longer than it should. The melody twisted and turned, creating patterns that were impossible to predict. Patrons couldn't look away. The music was both beautiful and frightening, like watching lightning dance in slow motion. Eyes widened, breaths held, hearts racing. Everyone felt it. There was a weight in the air, a presence, though no one could see it. The melody grew darker, more complex. The piano vibrated, carrying a resonance that touched the chest, deep and unsettling. Glasses rattled slightly, some napkins fluttered. Patrons instinctively drew back from the edge of the table, yet leaned in at the same time, hypnotized. The café felt alive, like it had transformed from a cozy, mundane place into something uncanny, something magical. A few brave souls whispered theories, but no one could find the words. Some claimed it was supernatural, others thought it was the waiter's extraordinary skill. Yet everyone felt the same prickling unease. The music wasn't just played. It was commanding attention, bending the room to its will. Then, as if responding to an invisible cue, the waiter's hands moved faster, the notes sharper, almost aggressive. Patrons flinched with each sudden chord, yet their eyes remained glued to him. A deep hum seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, subtle but unmistakable. Cups rattled, and one man grabbed his chair to steady it. The melody was no longer background, it was dominant, alive, and unpredictable. The tension built steadily. Patrons whispered to each other, glances exchanged with silent questions. What's happening? Is this safe? Should we leave? Yet no one moved. Something about the piano, about the young waiter, held them rooted in place. There was a story being told, a warning perhaps, or a signal that something beyond comprehension had begun. Suddenly, the piano hit a dissonant chord, louder and harsher than before. It sliced through the room like a sharp wind. Patrons flinched. Some jumped in surprise, and a few instinctively covered their ears. The waiter paused for a moment, lifted his head, and scanned the café slowly. His expression was unreadable, calm but piercing. It was clear now. This was no ordinary performance. The silence that followed was deafening. Hearts pounded. Conversations stopped. Phones were still raised, recording, yet no one dared speak. Patrons felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on them. Something extraordinary, possibly dangerous, was unfolding, and the young waiter was at the center of it. The music had drawn them in, hooked them, and now held them captive. And then, as if sensing the collective breath of the room, the waiter's hands moved again. The melody resumed, weaving tension into beauty once more. Every patron leaned forward instinctively, drawn by the impossible combination of fear and fascination. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew one thing for sure. The next moment would change everything. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the café. The piano's keys struck a chord so sharp, so unnatural, that it made people flinch. Cups rattled, chairs scraped, and several patrons gasped, some even standing up. The young waiter didn't flinch. His fingers moved over the keys with alarming precision, producing sounds that no ordinary piano could ever make. The notes seemed alive, twisting and bending in ways that made the air vibrate around them. An elderly woman at a corner table whispered, her voice barely audible, "Is it possessed?" Her hand trembled as she clutched her cup. The cafe owner stepped closer, curious but cautious, drawn by the sound yet wary of what he might see. The melody, however, seemed to wrap around him, holding him in place. The air suddenly felt heavier, almost alive, and the hum of the cafe, the usual chatter, the clinking cups faded into nothing. Shadows stretched along the walls, flickering as the lights above shivered. Patrons held their breath, a strange mixture of awe and fear gripping them. The music wasn't just music anymore. It was a presence. It commanded attention, bending the room's energy in subtle, almost supernatural ways. Every note seemed to pull on the nerves of the listeners, stirring a tension they couldn't explain. The waiter's eyes lifted, scanning the room briefly. There was no fear there, only focus, as if he could see something beyond the eyes of everyone watching. The notes grew sharper, faster, more intricate, as though he was summoning something unseen. Patrons felt it deep in their chests, a vibration that wasn't just sound but emotion itself, strange, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Then, without warning, he struck a final, piercing chord. It was abrupt, shocking, almost violent. And then the café seemed to exhale collectively, a hush falling over every corner. Patrons stared at the piano, at the waiter, trying to process what had just happened. A chill lingered, and everyone instinctively felt that the moment was far from ordinary. Something had shifted, and no one could tell exactly how. One man finally spoke, his voice shaking as he pointed toward the piano pedals. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Faint scorch marks marred the polished wood, subtle but undeniable. The floor beneath hummed with a low vibration, barely perceptible but unmistakable. The piano was no longer a simple instrument, it was a threshold, a vessel carrying more than music. The waiter stood, turning slowly to face the café. He seemed ordinary again, yet there was weight in his posture, a quiet authority that unsettled the room. Patrons instinctively stepped back, but couldn't tear their eyes away. When someone stammered, "You played that?" He nodded faintly. His gaze was distant, almost like he was somewhere else entirely. Then, under his breath, almost a whisper, he muttered, "Some doors, once opened, never close." The café sank into silence again, heavier this time, a tension that clung to walls, chairs, and the lingering scent of coffee. Patrons whispered in low tones, exchanging glances filled with awe and fear. Phones captured images and videos, yet they failed to hold any part of the strange weight in the air. The waiter returned to his duties calmly, moving silently among tables, cleaning, serving, as though nothing unusual had happened. But the atmosphere remained charged. Something extraordinary had passed through the room, leaving marks unseen but deeply felt. As the music ended, whispers grew into murmurs. People shared uneasy glances, each trying to comprehend what they had witnessed. A young man finally spoke, voice trembling. It wasn't normal. The piano, it moved itself. Eyes dotted to the pedals, then back at the waiter, who continued cleaning with serene precision. His calm contrasted sharply with the tension around him. The piano, once simple and unassuming, now seemed almost sentient. Scorch marks on the pedals, subtle vibrations, and the strange resonance in the air hinted at something alive within the instrument. Patrons felt an unspoken story pressing down on them. Some tried to rationalize it. Perhaps an electrical fault, perhaps an elaborate trick, but deep down, they knew they had glimpsed something beyond ordinary understanding. The waiter's presence was mesmerizing. He carried no fear, no urgency, only a quiet weight, a calm that somehow intensified the eerie atmosphere. People felt drawn to him, yet afraid to approach. Each movement he made was precise, deliberate, and meaningful. Patrons watched, silent, their curiosity battling their instinct to flee. "You really played that?" Someone finally dared to ask. The waiter didn't answer with words, only a faint nod, his eyes distant and reflective. His gaze seemed to pierce through time and space, as if he had seen the entire story behind the piano. His whisper lingered in the air. Some doors, once opened, never close, and it struck every listener like a warning. Conversations faltered, curiosity and fear warring in the minds of those present. Some replayed the performance in their heads, trying to understand the strange melodies, the unnatural chords, and the heavy silence that followed. The café seemed suspended, caught between reality and something else. And the patrons couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside had subtly shifted as well. Even after the last notes faded, the energy remained. The piano sat quietly, unassuming again, but everyone who had been there knew better. They had touched the edge of something extraordinary, something alive within music itself. The waiter moved among them, serving, cleaning, unnoticed yet omnipresent. His quiet routine contrasted with the magnitude of the event, deepening the mystery. Slowly, life in the cafe returned to a semblance of normalcy. Chairs scraped the floor, coffee machines hissed, and small chatter resumed. But an uneasy energy lingered, subtle but undeniable. Patrons whispered, replaying every moment in vivid detail. Phones captured images, videos, sounds, but nothing could truly convey the weight of what had occurred. The piano remained in the corner, silent, ordinary to any passerby. Yet for those who had watched, its presence was heavy, charged with memory and mystery. The waiter continued his work, calm, methodical, yet somehow aware of the fear and fascination that clung to the patrons. Every gesture, every step seemed measured, deliberate, and meaningful in ways no one could explain. Even as the last customer left, the cafe felt emptier, quieter than usual. Shadows lengthened with the setting sun, stretching across the tables and walls, hinting at stories yet untold. Patrons left with lingering questions, hearts still racing, minds replaying the impossible music. Some tried to rationalize it, but the sense of awe and fear refused to fade. The waiter cleaned quietly, moving between tables, a silent figure at the center of an invisible storm. Outside, the world continued unaware, but inside the cafe, time had shifted. Something had passed through, leaving a story suspended in the air. Something extraordinary, alive, and beyond understanding. And though the cafe appeared calm, the memory of the music, the trembling pedals, and the whispering words would haunt everyone who had witnessed it. The day ended, but the story didn't. It waited, like the piano itself, for the next curious listener, the next set of hands brave enough to touch the keys. And the waiter, calm as ever, remained ready, silent, mysterious, and endlessly compelling.